Welcome back to Ann Double D. We've got a really exciting guest with us today, Gareth, who's came up with one of the coolest apps in the world. And I'm Dave Evans, and you are?
Debbie Halls
You
Evans.
still, Debbie?
I am still Debbie. I am still.
Now, we met Gareth in the oddest location in the world, didn't we?
No, it wasn't the oddest location in the world.
Well, it was fairly odd.
It was in Cardigan. Why is that odd?
Well, it's miles away.
Depends where you live.
Well, it's
It's not miles away for Gareth because
no,
he
it
lives in
isn't. But you
Cardigan.
know that whole movie of planes, trains, and automobiles.
Yeah.
We just didn't take a train. We did everything else.
Anyway, Gareth, Dave's doing one of his waffles. Welcome.
Hello, nice to
Hi.
see you again.
It is, yeah.
So we started talking off mic, so we're going to talk on mic, and we've just referenced that it's actually two.
Yeah, it's flown.
Do you know, we left the do lectures that after that event and flew back, and somewhere between Bridgend and the airport, I got a virus,
Yeah.
and we were flying with a really well-known airline, Loganair, back to Scotland, and they over Newcastle they nearly landed the plane. I got that sick that quickly that they were really concerned that they couldn't complete the journey.
Yeah, it was really weird.
I was stood arched over this
And it
cubicle.
gone a very funny shade
Yeah,
of grey.
I was in real danger really quickly. And then, I pulled myself together and got through it like a man.
Really.
That's right. I
We're
know.
going to actually go
I
there.
didn't mean to say that.
Gareth, introduce yourself to the world of and.
Oh, sorry, you cut out for a second then. Could you just repeat that?
I said, please introduce yourself to the world of and.
Oh, hello. Right, okay. My name is Gareth Dauncy. I live in Cardigan. Family man with two grown-up boys who are much, much bigger than me now. And I go in the sea every day, or try to, or at least look at the sea every day. I'm an architect, and I try to help people based on my own experience of learning to help myself.
So that's the bit where, well, I think we'll probably cover all of that. One, sea swimming, definitely need to talk to you about that because I am the person who really struggles with the cold. I've actually blown the lights today by plugging in a heater. So I'm fascinated with that one. But let's talk about mood first because that was how we all ended having a conversation.
Yeah.
Talk to us what mood is first and then the story behind it.
It took me a while, and there's no real plan or sense or anything to this story at all. But what I eventually realized that trying to sort of look after yourself, and whether you call that being happy, content, whatever it is, and don't get me wrong, there's all different levels you can sink to.
Yeah.
But what I realized was eventually that unless you had a sort of sense of perspective and some sort of self-awareness, you can become lost in your thoughts and they cannot be a true reflection of reality.
Yep.
So I chanced upon recording how I felt each day with a calendar and coloured pens. And over a while, I started to see patterns emerge, which were counter to what I was thinking. And then I started to realize that actually, I think I'm making this whole thing worse with the way I think.
Yep.
Now in hand with all sorts of other learning and reading, and it took a long, long time.
Yeah.
But that realization was then reinforced when COVID came along and I saw the whole thing lift. And I felt bad about that at the time because everyone was having such a hard time. But it was weird for me being self-employed. The pressure, the day-to-day pressure, which is mostly self-imposed, lifted, and that outweighed the worry that came with everything else. And I could see it. And I thought, oh my God, there's something in this.
Yeah.
And therefore I'd been so bad for so long that I felt incumbent then to do something about it.
Mm.
So tell us what you did, because I've been using it for 4 years.
Well, I made an app then called Mood, but that was just based on my own experience of, there were several things that were super important to me. One was absolute privacy, because it turns out that mental health and prayer apps, I think, gather the most data of all apps. And I also remember how I felt when I was really low about not wanting to talk about it or explain it or expose myself. Sounds ridiculous now, but I felt like people would treat me differently. So privacy was a key thing. The idea of beauty and not being patronizing and being abstract almost. So before I sort of designed what mood would be like, I started to think of myself as this colored barcode. And I was going to
Okay.
make this piece of art called This Is Me. And then I thought there's something in this where you actually are not embarrassed by how you felt. And that picture would be unique and tell a story. And if you are not embarrassed about it, you might be more willing to share it. So there was this idea of being able to share how you felt to initiate conversations. And then the other aspect of it was perspective. So if you're looking at a painting like this, you can only see brushstrokes. But as you zoom out at different scales, you start to see different patterns, whether that's over a week, a month, or a year. So it was just that combined with, if you can't face getting out of bed, the last thing you want is another thing to do. And everyone's trying to sell happiness and do this, do that. And I also didn't want people to become obsessed with it either. So there was this thing of just letting it go, but still seeing the patterns over time. So that if you could see that things haven't been as bad as you thought, or consistently as bad, maybe you wouldn't catastrophize the future better so much. And maybe that was one step towards having a bit of agency over it. But that idea of just one tap a day came from just not wanting another thing to do. Because when I did the calendar, I would write notes on it. I would do it several times a day. And in the end, you just don't do it. And if you don't do it, there's no point. So it was all of that combined with the idea of just one little daily check-in where you just think, how do I feel today?
I'm a new adopter of it. So Debbie's 4 years, and I took it on in light of getting ready to talk with you. And I loved the simplicity at the time, but on these things I'm a bit slower, aren't I, Hen, to getting going. But I was just clicking the buttons of what you were just describing on mine and looking at the clearer patterns that are starting to form, and then that personal knowledge that I have as I see it as to what's triggering it at that time, and being able to see how I can be different with my thinking to match the colors. It is such a simple, easy idea that I have to say is effective.
He's done well then. I mean, I explained at
Are
the
you
time.
implying that was patronizing?
No, well, just a bit. I know I explained to you at the time, Gareth, that for me it's been really powerful because I did exactly what you said, was that I convinced myself, because I'm a natural catastrophizer, that everything was really, really bad.
Yeah.
But when you start to realize that where your head was at initially, you look at it, and the day I used to do mine in the morning, not in the evening. And for me, it also allowed me to set myself up. If I allowed myself to have better thinking methods and process for me personally, and it was really fascinating. And also, whether it be from a female perspective, cycle related, or even family related, client related, it was really interesting seeing the patterns and sometimes the intensity of those patterns that I literally could swing from, because it is color coded, as you've said, and it's the swing from the color, the depth of the tones of the color, how I could swing dramatically. So I didn't do like this natural evolving shade. It like went pale to dark. That was it. That was my style. And I thought it's really fascinating. And knowing that you've shared this to the world now and it's been out there a long time, what stories and what things are you encountering that have helped you as well?
I often think, who am I to be doing anything like this? And to have a podcast, because the podcast asks exactly the same question that the app asks, which is, how do you feel today? And it's like this, really, there's a conversation, there's no agenda. And I just let the other person talk and see where it goes. And I've done 90 odd of those now, right? And I've met all these brilliant people. And I learn something every time, but it's always the same intention, really, is so that people might see themselves reflected in things. become slightly more aware or feel slightly less alone. So it's still all motivated by the same thing.
Mm.
And that just comes back to me not wanting other people to feel as bad as I felt for a long period. And then that comes back to work, a lot of it, being an architect. And the weird thing now is that what I've learned through that entire period is now informing how I want to work as an architect in the future. And I'll explain a bit about that later if you're interested. But
Yeah,
which has nothing to do with designing buildings for people, actually. It's to do with understanding people and getting under the skin of something and questioning things more to the point where the need is interrogated before we even look at the how, and then to try and set people on the right track. So I'm starting something called before architecture, which is the stuff you do before you actually commission a piece of architecture to make sure it's feasible and right for you. But sorry, this is a very long-winded way of answering you, but so I often go through periods where I think, why am I doing any of this stuff? It doesn't pay a single bill and it takes an awful lot of time. And then I keep coming back to and being reminded of why, because someone will send a message or get in touch or something.
Mm.
And it sounds cliched, but you don't need many of those messages to remind you how you used to be, how you've moved on from that, and why you want to help other people avoid ending up in the same boat. So that's it really. And it doesn't take many of those messages. And I'm not saying I'm inundated with them, but when I do get them, they help a lot and they put wind in the sails. And then I just keep going.
Well, one of the things you're describing is in our world of coaching is when you are lucky enough to find out about the effect of a choice somebody made that's positive,
Yeah.
and they take a moment to tell you about it, and you have this amazing moment or this encouragement or this that's
It's very
good.
emotional because you don't realize everything's at arm's length. And with the world being digital and meeting people all over the world now, you don't really realize if you've actually had an effect on anybody. So when you sometimes, I mean, it might even out of the blue, you might meet somebody in the most odd situation and they bring it up and you think, my God. So if you're just dropping stones and creating ripples that get out there, often you don't know where the hell one of those touches a bank or somebody. And then when someone tells you, it's often a bit like makes you speechless because you
Yeah.
can't quite believe it. You think, my God, how did that happen? And then you ask how it happened and then how they got introduced or what those connections were. And you think, my God. And the world seems to be shrinking all the time in that sense.
You know, your approach that you explained at the beginning, which actually for me is pretty much how Dave and I deal with life, is that life is very complex, but the ability to simplify it, which is I genuinely believe is what you've done, and create a safe space to do it, which again, a lot of people don't do. Do you think we over complex or we make things more complex? And if we do, why?
I know I certainly do.
Mm.
And I'm trying to unlearn a lot of, I mean, it sounds absurd, I'm 52. And I feel like I'm trying to almost be 20 again in terms of unlearning what I've kind of conditioned myself to be over the last 30 years. And a lot of that comes, it's about trying to deal in fundamentals more and to have, well, for me anyway, and to have less fundamentals for sure.
Yeah.
So a lot of things happen in life which give you perspective on what's important or not. And I've always sort of been grateful for everything and realized, not chasing money or family and relationships, how important they are. But it's still easy to aspire to things, not necessarily material things, just chase things. And all of a sudden you're so busy that you can't see the wood for the trees. So I'm trying to genuinely strip everything back to be as simple as possible and then to not even complicate those things.
Yeah.
It's taking years, is the truth, but I can see it in my face. It's definitely having an effect because I'm able to not get so caught up in things as I used to. I'm able to say no to things. I'm able to, I guess, be far more present and not be in the future or the past so much. and to try and appreciate each day, and to try and make the most of each experience and not judge it as good or bad. But it's easier said than done.
Well, yeah,
And it's like a constant bloody practice, really.
I say, because I'm 54, and I always say I know less now than I
Yeah.
did.
I feel
But
exactly the same. Yeah.
yeah,
But I know that I know less.
so
Yeah.
I find that quite exciting. I find it exciting that there is so much more out there
Yeah.
that can help and be a positive influence and all of those things. So knowing, can I ask a quick question?
Keep your question.
Thanks.
I'd like to also step in and connect and say, for the listener, I also operate in a world where, like everyone, I have to reset my day every day. So not only do we have this realization that we don't know nowhere near as enough as we could, should, or might have, right? I got to reset tomorrow morning, and that's, I think, is the beauty of this conversation, is that we're accepting that that's okay. Your question.
No, you touched on before about how this has affected the architect practice that you do. And I think that's really tangible for people to, what does that look like now? So if I was listening to this and I was in a bit of a shitty place and I just felt stuck, you've come through that. What does that look like in a tangible perspective? So, and being an architect is pretty intense. So what does that look like for you?
Do you mean how will I practice architecture differently as a consequence of what's happened over the last few
Yeah.
years?
That's a really smart question.
That's a really good question.
Great idea.
I need to have said it better. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I understand what aspects of being an architect contributed to me burning out, and they're the aspects which there's a part of architecture I love, absolutely love, and would say I'm quite good at, and that's, to me, the bit which has the most value, which is cracking an idea for somebody in a holistic way, which ultimately seems inevitable and easy. And when someone says that's easy, I could have done that, you know, you're onto something. And that's quite a tricky thing to do, because you need to be willing to quickly explore all sorts of options that you know are going to be wrong to eventually land on something that's right. But there's only any point in doing something that's right if it's actually needed. So many times in architecture, someone will say, I've got a brief, I want to do X. And more often than not, somebody will say yes. They'll think of different ways of configuring the brief, but then it gets built. But what usually doesn't happen is that it gets questioned in a way that you actually need to do this. And a long conversation where you start to understand the motivations behind it, what those relationships are with other people, and you get into the skin of something where somebody opens up, often doesn't happen. It's just accepted. This is the brief. We'll move forward with that.
Yeah.
So what I've realized more and more is that, and this comes from the podcast and understanding myself more and being able to talk to people more, is that there's a real kind of niche and a need to do work before you actually do that work. And I'm calling it before architecture. So it's like the thing you do before you actually progress a piece of architecture. And it may be that the outcome is that you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
But it's a willingness, because I don't want to do the rest of it. I'm absolutely invested in seeing the feasibility of something and whether it's the right thing for somebody. And you can do that in a day or two. So I'm going to start a thing called Before Architecture, which is about getting under the skin of the need and questioning that, then exploring hand in hand with somebody. And it can be virtual like this, because I've done it a few times, well, more than a few times, but
Yeah.
test different options and set them off on the right track. So at least if they've got some sort of potential dream or something that will never get realized because they don't know how to start, they will have the clarity and confidence to know that if ever the time is right, I'm on solid ground moving forward. So it's to scratch that itch without them having to take somebody on as a commission.
Right. So, and that's dramatically different from how you've operated before.
Yeah, because in the past I worked on one project for about 7 years, and before that, when I worked for someone else, I was on it for 10 years. And that's the thing. See, it's such a slow moving process, and there's many people out there who are far better than me at that 95% of the job,
Yeah.
that is the procurement and making of a building. But the stuff I love and enjoy is being creative, but in a very practical, down to earth way, which is not just thinking about the form of something. It's the impact of it, whether it suits you long term, short term, whether it's going to be something which is beautiful but also practical. If you think of mood, all the things that inform mood would inform any piece of design or any piece of writing or any piece of music or anything.
Yeah.
So you strip it down to the point where it seems inevitable and looks easy and looks entirely appropriate for the thing it's doing, but is also delightful and beautiful at the same time.
That was a good answer.
Do you know what's really nice for anyone listening is how you go so wide and you end up in a really clear space in the middle as a concise summary. It's a skill.
It's not an intentional skill.
Well, it's a very it's, knowing that your podcast is, as you've said, is this conversation of starting off of how do you feel today. I'm not going to ask the blatantly obvious cliche, what was your favourite one? What are maybe some of the best learnings or unlearnings that you've taken from those 90 conversations that you've so far had? The most impactful ones, I suppose, for the
It could be to do with who I ask to come on it, but what I realise over and over again is that fundamentally we're all the same
Mhm.
and have similar needs, fears. It's just that some people have learned how to cope with those and manage them in a way which allows them to enjoy living.
Mm.
And I guess the overarching learning, even though I learn something new every time, is the more present you can be and the more distant you can be from your thoughts and not get caught up in them, the more you can just be and actually enjoy the smallest, most seemingly inconsequential things in life. And then out of that comes a certain amount of joy.
Mm.
And it's not about achieving or grabbing onto external things. So, yeah, that's a very consistent thing that keeps coming up in different ways, but it's the same message.
Yeah, which I find fascinating because I think we have this, when we talk to people and coach people and work with people, I think you think you're going to find out something massively different. And there is, like you say, doesn't matter how affluent that person is, how successful they are, or how stuck they could even be in that moment. It is, as humans, we're individually unique, but so similar.
Yeah.
That lovely oxymoron that exists in life. Now, I did ask a question at the beginning about, you say you go seawater swimming.
Oh, yeah.
In Wales. So there is no hot water down there.
There's not, no.
There's no hot sea.
No. I don't go as much as I used to, even though I want to. But I intend to rectify that soon. So I used to go every day, and then that became a couple of times a week, and now it's once or twice a week.
Okay.
At the moment, it's a bit of a relief when you actually get in the sea because the air is colder until you come out.
Right.
And then it's all evaporating and it's freezing. But I mean, it's fantastic. And whether I'm just looking at, I feel so lucky, right? Because I can go in the sea 2 miles up the road. And if I'm not in it, I can sit up there and look at it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I told you this, but I may have when we first met. But it all started because I met a seal. And I kept going back to see this seal. And in keeping on going back, lots of things happened. Like I started to feel small. I started to feel humble. I feel humble anyway, but I started to feel of no consequence. That's a better way of putting it. I started to feel connected to things. And because it was so cold, I just stopped thinking momentarily. And then the more I did that, the more it started to gel with other things I was trying, which were all really taking me in the same direction. And it's the things we were talking about earlier. So it was just another early component to that. And it's easy to get complacent and then stop doing those things.
Mm.
and I realize I need to consistently do them to say consistently well. And consistently well doesn't mean you're always happy all the time. It just means you're happy
Yeah.
to just accept how life's going, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I also think being consistent is a real challenge. You know, I think it's
Yeah.
one of disposable words. Oh, I'm consistently doing that. And in reality, we're not very good at it as humans of being
No,
consistent.
I agree. It's difficult.
I know, how do you deal with the cold? How do, how
Uh,
is it that you do that allows you to? So I get the point, like you say, right now in this season of winter, that is colder, but how do you actually overcome it? What do you do?
best thing is to go with a friend. So if you go with a friend, you can't not do it.
Ah, I like
And
it.
you can't not turn up either. So me and a really good friend did it for, I don't know, say 500 times or something. And it just got to the point where neither of us would let the other one down.
Hmm.
And it becomes very easy then in all weathers. Even I remember there was ice on the sand and things like that. But saying that, I'm not as brave as it sounds because I've got a little 2 mil shorty wetsuit. I used to have a 2 mil cardigan, so you still
Okay.
have the shorts. And in the freezing winter, you'd have gloves and little socks.
Okay. All right. So
You do acclimatize for definite. It's
Ah,
just it's still cold, but it's not as cold as when you don't do it.
okay. All right. We have a lock
Get
near,
Dave to go with you.
well, yeah, I know we have a lock near our house and we can see it. And I agree with you. You get that kind of cathartic feeling. I get it from trees. That
Yeah.
is, I feel that insignificant joy because that is, you know, we have two 300-year-old trees outside our house. And every time I look at them, I just feel, you know, everything's going to be okay. It's a really unusual thing for me to feel, but I genuinely do look at them and just go, it's okay. Because look, the trees are there. They've been here for 300 years. They're going to keep growing. They're going to keep doing the thing. I just find it. So
and there's a magic. I've done open water swimming, and there aren't many times, but there's a few moments where you'll go to swim in a lake, which I really despise. That's why I do it. And it's perfectly still like glass, and you set one or two of the first ripples, and you move if you're calm and you're not cold and you're not reacting like you've talked about there, and you see it. You have if you're present enough to notice it, it's one of those unexpected magical moments. And I think that's what I really like about you going in the sea is I can relate to it. And I grew up at in Burghead, northeast coast of Scotland, and had a house by the sea for years, and it was the only way I got through ME was being able to stare at the sea. And
Mm.
I can really feel that feeling of insignificance you highlighted. I can really relate to it of it helps. It helps
Well,
massively.
the thing I love as well is if you sit in the same spot every day, it's like looking at a picture frame, which gives the view consistency. And if the view is consistent, you start to see all the things which change every day, whether that's the weather, whether it's birds, whatever it is, the sea being flat or wavy or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think then you start to connect more with cycles. And I love growing vegetables as well and being in the garden. And it doesn't have to be a big scale of anything. I think anything natural, if you immerse yourself in it,
Yeah.
it has the same effect. It's just it's a bit more immediate if you were small in that context. But even just picking tomatoes or watering cucumbers, whatever it is, it all has a similar sort of effect, really. So I think anything where you can just slow things down and be in nature of any variety, of any context, I think is for me is helpful.
Just to clarify for our listeners today, we are suggesting therapy with watering cucumbers as a number one.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And tomatoes.
Correct. Now, one question we ask all our lovely guests is tied around our business, and we ask a very open question, which is, what is your and? And everybody has a different interpretation of it. So I would love to know is, what is your interpretation of that question? What is your and?
Do you mean in addition to what you do as
Yeah.
that pays the bills?
Or just what it means to
Yeah.
you? So if I just asked you, what is your and? What is the thing that goes through your mind and what does it trigger for you?
I'm not quite sure what you mean. I'm so sorry to say that.
Well, that's really interesting in regards to is that everybody has a different interpretation, and for some people there isn't a meaning in it because it doesn't actually stimulate anything further.
The thing is, right, I feel so curious about so many things, and this is part of the problem, that it's very difficult to think you were this, that, or the other. And I feel like everything is just a mush. That sounds crazy, I know, right? Because you've got to do work, you've got relationships and a family and all this kind of stuff, and you do things on your own as well. But I did this exercise recently, which was interesting because what it showed was you did a sketch of your life, and then you did it if all those things that you thought constitute your life were taken away, and then you did a third one, which was what if money was no object. And the funny thing was that the thing that I drew consistently was a silly smiling face and the word fun down the bottom. And the second picture where everything was taken away just had question marks showing that that can't be contingent on these external things. But number one and number three, number three was not earning, you didn't need to earn a living, money was of no consequence, looked exactly the same as number one, where I did need to earn a living. So what I realized is that I've already got pretty much everything I want. And I don't mean that in a kind of smug, glib way. I just mean I don't feel like I'm searching for anything. And I feel very lucky and content to be able to pay the bills and along the way, hopefully help a few people based on how I learned to help myself. And learning to help yourself is a nightmare, really, as you probably know, because there's not much help out there. And you haven't got a clue what you're doing. It takes so long. And then even then, you don't know if you're kind of onto the right thing. But all I can go on is the proof that I look different. My eyes are different, certainly. My wife tells me they're different. And I feel like I'm myself again after many years. And it feels something that can last as well.
I like it. I like you some because I
I
think
didn't answer your question at all.
It does. The whole thing.
But-
This is what the reason why we ask that question is that everybody then thinks about it and always has an answer, but their initial is, no, I don't know what that actually means. And then suddenly, oh yeah, it does mean this to me. So I just think it's glorious. So thank you for sharing.
and that and is about meaning, and that meaning is personal. And what we like to do with the word "and" is then flip it and say, right, what parts of meaning are important to you that are in your DNA? And your DNA is daily, which is some of the parts we talked about earlier. And if I could reflect back to you, you talked about this curiosity, asking questions. You talked about this need to be present. You've talked about helping others and how you've learned, figured out, been determined to figure out your own stuff. And so therefore, you have all the ingredients of a pretty well-tuned meaning. You just do it in your own unique way, and that actually is the whole idea. Is personal. It's up to you. And what I also love that you're doing as well, Gareth, is we talk about and is action now, do something different. You seem to know what different is, and you know what consistency is. So in that ability to bring all of this stuff into a single point, which you've done several times in our chat today, which is really, really great. So I would like to take a slight tangent.
It's not like you.
I know. I came up with a new word this week, tangentification.
Dave comes up with new words all the time, Gareth.
What do you think of this word? I invented it earlier. Truity.
Say it again.
Truity.
Truity.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was attempting to describe a feature about a person I really liked. And I said, the thing I liked about this person is their levels of truity.
They also did look at him with a blank expression to try and work out what it actually meant for them.
Well, I've got a new word for you then.
One.
And this came from a chap called Tyler, the Creator. Do you know him?
No, but I just love the whole name because I call myself a creator as well. So go on.
Well, he's a rapper, but he's an all-round artist. He's superb, right? And I listened to his new album, or latest album this week. And there was a word he used on there, which I hadn't used before, but I really liked it. It was called percentify. And he
Percentage.
was relating it in terms of his own life and saying he wasn't ready to become a dad. But he didn't want to percentify his life, meaning cut it up into slices for different people and things like that. And I knew that word before, percentify, and it's probably he made it up. I don't know. But I've been thinking about that word a lot in the last few days.
Interesting. Because when I'm coaching, I ask people when they say they're stuck, or particularly when people say they work with somebody they absolutely abhor or they really struggle with. And I always say around percentages, how much time in that whole week, so look at your week as 100%, how much time do you spend with that person? So generally, what's their influence and impact on you in that time? And it normally works out, it's normally below 5%. And then suddenly the brain goes, oh, well, I can deal with that.
Yeah.
95%
Yeah.
of the time, I'm not with that person. But actually, our brain is always telling us that person is such a big thing. It's an impact of everything, every thought, every thinking, every move I make. But when we actually percentify it becomes a positive way of us reframing self and going, yeah, I can deal with 5% of my
There's a
time.
high level of truity to it.
Very good.
Yeah. I think I'd like to just perhaps bring us thoughts together with something quite nice around survive and thrive. What I really love about what you've shared today with mood and your own process and your before architecture stuff is that we talk about survive and thrive as a mechanic. And for anyone listening, we in our event earlier this year in Mallorca, we were stunned how well received it was when we presented to a group of successful people how much or what percentify of their day did they spend in survive mode, and it was so high, and it wasn't surviving danger, it was surviving in normal patterns they do all the time and with people that they like, right? And our goal in this conversation today, in this episode of And, is about learning to be present, like you highlighted, and therefore able to thrive and be in your space. And I really want to just thank you for that part of the conversation today. Any more questions you want to ask Gareth, Lily? Because you have loads.
I think that we've done really well
You look
today.
sated.
I do feel that you
She
have,
looks sated. It's quite interesting.
but you had this effect when I heard you doing your talk, because I do think there's a humility and a delightful humbleness to you. I do think it's because you're a natural creative as well yourself, so it comes across. But I think that ability to take the complex, make it simple, and make it tangible, so that you can do something with it. And that's why, I'll go back to the app itself. It has truly helped me. I wasn't consistent with things like journaling or anything like that, because I always made new rules up about it. It had to be this, or it had to be, 27 pages long, or I had to be writing into the third party or fit in with what I thought was happening. Whereas that simplicity, that if we could share more of that,
Yeah.
I genuinely think people would be in better places, because it's hard, right? Life is hard.
Yeah, I think what you've described is because it asks so little of you, but that what it does ask of you accumulates. And it's the accumulation of that which becomes meaningful. But the other thing I was going to say is everything we've talked about, I did a little talk recently, and what I realized in doing it, so I talked about mood, podcast, architecture, things like that. But it took me a long, long time to realize this, is that part of the reason I sort of burned out was there was always this sense of guilt about how we live, the effect we have on the people around the world and all this kind of thing, and wanting to help people. But I thought that translated into helping people directly. And the more you do of that, the more threadbare you can become. And then what I eventually realized, but it took a long, 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 long time, is it's far more empowering if you help someone to help themselves. And it's a bit like how you deal with your kids, isn't it? Whether you let them fall or whether you stop them falling in the first place.
Yep.
And I'm not saying this is universal or anything, but for me, that seemed like a place that I could exist in, where you're still helping people, but you're helping them to help themselves. And that's now partly what informed the architecture thing as well. It's just like wanting to set people off on the right track. and then they're on a solid footing where they can take themselves forward. The same with mood.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a part of that for me is that's the human element of, humans need humans. Even an introverted human still needs other people around them, and we need community in a sense of that. And I think there are times when we get lost that we don't belong somewhere, and I think we conform. And I always say, what can we compose and not conform? And I think that's really important. I'm going to stop waffling now.
I like it. And if you are listening to this and you want to know more about the app we've been talking about today and put an end to your doom and reverse the word into mood, who knows what's possible by downloading the Mood app, and you can get that on Apple's App Store and all the app places you can go these days.
Well, it'll be very tricky to find, right? So the easiest thing to do is to go on the website, which is moodapp.io. And if you follow the links to the App Store and the Play Store there, the first 30 days are free. So it just gives someone a chance to try it and see if it's any good for them.
Awesome. We'll make sure that's in all the blurb as well.
We have been talking to Gareth Dauncy. It's been a fantastic conversation. The creator of the mood tracking app, Mood. Strange that, isn't it? He has shared some absolute light bulb moments for all of us around his existence, how he does things and where he operates from. But please do remember, through this conversation, think about how you can simplify your life by being more present. If you live near the sea, have you thought about safely going out and see what it's like every day and using the cold water treatment to feel even better? And who knew you could even do architecture with before architecture? Taking care of the project without doing the project to make sure the project fits the project in the first place. We call that an ecology test in coaching. Do you really mean what you say? I love that. And all it leaves us to say is, Gareth, thank you for your time and your insight.
Thank you for having me. It's been a treat.
Thanks, Gareth.
Cheers.
Sorry, Dave nearly just disconnected the whole call then. I can cut that.